dear viewer peoples and secondary viewer peoples that are watching it on the playback, all those peoples. We are super happy to welcome you to the November Parentis Literary Salons. I'm Emma Fergusson. This is the glamorous and gorgeous Christina Chu. We are super excited about tonight. Please do drop where you're from and say who you are, because right now I am going to do quick shout outs to a couple of people who should be out in the audience. Everyone from City Lit in Baltimore, we want to say hello to you. Hi, City Lit. And also to the IWWG, who may be out there. So hi, guys. I also want to do a special shout out to our November Salon sponsor. So our November Salon sponsor is Chickadee Prince Books. Yay, Chickadee Prince Books. Thank you very much. Thank you for sponsoring us. We are thrilled to announce that their recent acquisition by a larger publisher allows us to pass on the fact that this small press is planning to expand their list to 40 books this year. And they are very much looking for submissions of great full-length complete manuscripts. So if you have one, they might be a good place for it. Here's the best part. They are planning to be genre inclusive. So pretty much anything that you have written and that is great, you can send to them. They're just looking for full-length books. And of course, you will need to check out their guidelines. We know that already, right? And you will find those guidelines on chickadeeprince.com. So that's the November sponsor. Thank you very much, Chickadee Prince. And our other big news is that the DeGroat Foundation has become major sponsors of our Literary Salon series, and we are extremely excited and thank you. And they want to tell you to know that the next submission period for their Courage to Write grants, which, as you know, we are very fond of their Courage to Write grants, is they are $7,000 grants for individuals who are seeking the courage to write. All you have to do is be over 18. So that's it. And then the submission period is from December 1st to February 12th. And it was moved up so that the winners could receive their $7,000 checks in the spring and be able to plan to attend writing residencies that same year, which I think is really cool of them. So thanks to the DeGroat Foundation for becoming major sponsors of our literary salons. And we have a special guest out there. Claudette DeGroat is sitting in the front row. Hi! So you should all talk to the rest of the show. Anyway, Christina, let's talk about why we're here and trauma and all the things that we're going to be talking about, tonight.
Wonderful. First, thank you all for coming. I see Louis Greenstein out there. Hello,
Hey.
Hello.
Hey.
I see a bunch of people out there who we all know. Helene's out there. Hello, Helene. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Rachel Holiday. She's
Great.
Hi, Rachel.
So this month we are talking about trauma. And I am so glad that we actually have this month, because trauma is becoming one of these buzzwords, right? Like everyone talks about trauma and, the trauma in their lives and whatever. I read a book many years ago now called My Body Holds the Score. And I was reading that book actually as, to help me with research about what people, how people process trauma in their lives and how it affects them later on. And I just became more and more obsessed with this idea, and how really everyone suffers trauma at some point in their lives, right? And so it's so curious about how some people can process it and some people are not less successful, right? But as writers, we often deal with trauma. Trauma is conflict. We're all looking for that in our work, and we're all trying to speak to different issues in our lives and in society, right? So it seemed perfectly a really good fit for the authors that we have today.
It's a super interesting thing. That book that you were talking about has been on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 2 years, 2.5 years. A book that is not a fun. It is. I mean, I have not personally read it, but it is a kind of academic piece of writing, nonfiction writing. And yet it is somehow connecting to so many people that it's on the New York Times bestseller list. So whether or not people actually have trauma, they believe they have trauma, they have named whatever is difficult in their lives trauma. Like I am super interested in, you know me, I'm always talking about word definitions and what does it mean and what level does something become a trauma. Like I'm just really interested in sussing all these things out and seeing what people think. So yeah, let's meet our let's meet our writers.
Well, before I introduce everyone, I just wanted to say, so trauma is, anyone's personal response to some kind of distressing experience, right? So we're going to hear from these authors about why they're here in this particular salon, what they want to talk about.
Christina, can you repeat the name of the book? Sorry, Becky wanted to know.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's called My Body Holds the Score.
My Body Holds the Score.
Yes.
There you go. Okay. Sorry.
So let's introduce these amazing authors. We're going to hear from Richard Jeffrey Newman. He's a poet. But first, I'll introduce Jessica DuLong. She is an American Society of Journalists and Authors Award winner. Her work has appeared in the likes of CNN.com, Newsweek, International, Rolling Stone, Psychology Today, Newsday, and others. Everyone say hello to Jessica. Our next author will be Anna Malaika Tubbs. She's a New York Times bestselling author and a TED Talk speaker. She is the author of The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. Everyone say hello.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Our final author will be Jeffrey Newman. And Richard is, like I said, a poet, which is wonderful. I think it's an awesome way to start this salon. He's published 2 books of poetry, a book called Words for What Those Men Have Done, and The Silence of Men, as well as 3 books of translation from classical Persian poetry, selections from Said's Gulstan and selections from Said's Bustan, and The Teller of Tales, stories of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh. Is that
Shahnameh.
Shahnameh?
And the first poet is actually Sadi, not Said.
Oh, thank you. So his 3rd book of poems, Shuva, is that how you say it?
Yes,
Shuva, is forthcoming. He's been curating the First Tuesday reading series in Jackson Heights, New York since 2012. He also edits, he leads one of the first in-person Parentis cycle of support accountability groups in Queens, where he lives with his family. Everyone, please welcome Richard Jeffrey.
Yay! Very exciting. So yeah, this is super, super cool. So we're all going to just chill out and listen to some readings first, and then we're going to get into some deep discussions. So Christina, would you like to give,
that was Richard's?
That was Richard's thing.
That was me.
That
was me. I recognized myself in that. Thank you. Really, Christina and Milda, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. And hello, everybody who is watching from wherever you are. I'm going to read 2 poems from Words for What Those Men Have Done, which is the second book that I've written. And there's really nothing to say about them. I'm just going to read them side by side. There are 2 different kinds of trauma in different kind of trauma in each poem. And I just thought it'd be interesting to put them side by side and see what kind of conversation might develop and how that plays off with what Jessica and Anna are going to read. So the first poem is called Clean. The first bus of the morning screams into gear, pulls slowly into traffic, a beast stretching itself to start the day. At the red light beneath my window, as a few raindrops hit the pane above the one I'm looking through, the driver turns his wipers on, and the thick gray clouds spread out above this city, release the drunk and vengeful man they've been holding back since last night. He beats his fists against the glass, trembles my entire building when he screams. I want to feel his rage against my skin, so I head downstairs, my shorts torn without pockets, my shirt as well, in sandals that if I left right now to search for you would not survive to the end of my block. I walk the garden path till I'm standing at the south end, soaking wet and watching the water in the fountain dance its welcome to the water from the sky. The winter I was 17, Kristen pushed me down into this fountain center, her face framed by trees I climbed when I was 8 and 9 and 10. Do you trust me? She asked. I nodded. She smiled, bent between my legs, and as she fumbled my zipper open, nothing as I hardened against her tongue came to me of the man pushing himself between my teeth, pouring into me out of who he was. And then who I was gathered itself to a point in me I kept for myself as long as I could, until, in answer to a summons I'd only half believed the world contained, it rose up out of me, white against the white flakes just starting to fill the quiet air around us. And I was clean. And the second poem I'm going to read is called Because I Can't Not Know What He Saw. And the epigraph is remembering a photograph from Iris Chang's The Rape of Nanking, if anybody knows that book. This month's Harper's Readings brings from the people of Boro in eastern India a list of verbs impossible in English. Khonse, to pick an object up with care. Dasa, not to place a fishing instrument. Asusu, to feel unknown in a new place. Some sound like Yiddish curses. You should dig soil like a swine, or may your children gobre, fall in a well unknowingly. I want that kind of verb for the way whoever it was pulled the woman's robe up over her head. For how the man who did this to her forced to watch, brother, father, husband, son, neighbor, for how each of them invades my sleep. And for the way I felt when I first saw it, what I feel now remembering it, the way I kept taking Iris Chang's The Rape of Nanking off the shelf and crouching in the corner of Border's lower level to stare and to stare. For that too, I want a verb. And I want a verb as well, and it's not rape, though certainly he raped her, for the sword hilt rising from between her parted thighs, and for the way I hate myself for hoping she was already dead when he buried his blade in her. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, powerful.
That was really powerful.
Thank you.
Can you briefly talk about the Rape of Nanking so people understand?
So, I mean, the Rape of, I will confess, I do not remember the exact years, but it was World War II, I believe, right? And the Rape of Nanking, the Japanese invaded China. Nanking is a city in China. And I guess the Rape of Nanking was is sort of the type for what they did in general in invading China. And it is not a perfect analogy, but you can compare the way in which they invaded and the kinds of horrific atrocities they committed to the kinds of things that the Nazis did in the concentration camps.
Right.
You know, they practiced live vivisection, right? So they would actually cut people open alive. I mean, I don't need to go into all of those details,
right.
but but Iris Chang wrote this book, The Rape of Nanking, and my understanding, if I remember the story correctly, it so traumatized her, she ended up committing suicide after writing the book. And I don't know if that's the full story, because I just don't remember. But I know that her committing suicide somehow was connected to the writing of the book.
Yeah, it's very when you're dealing with torture and that kind of thing, it can be very, very hard to stick with for many years, right? When you're writing a book. What I think is so interesting about you bringing this up is that, you know, people often clump Asians together into a group, right? And what they don't realize, there's in history, you know, Asians were very like mistrusting of depending on who you were, right? There was a lot of mistrust between Chinese and Japanese and Koreans. And so like when people lump Asians into one group, it's a little bit complicated. It makes things a little bit difficult, right? Because there's so much trauma and generational trauma that like I still have uncles who are like, you know, don't trust those Japanese. And I'm like, we're like years and years away from that, right?
I taught English in South Korea about 30 years ago, and you could still, you could still feel it. There were people there who had been forced to learn Japanese, right? I think Korean was outlawed.
That's right.
In fact, right? It was outlawed, in fact. And there were people whose parents or grandparents were, you know, had learned Japanese, had an awfully hard time speaking it emotionally. I mean, not cognitively, right? But just emotionally because of that kind of thing.
Yeah, we had an author, Min-Jin Lee, who writes for us, and her book is very much about that, being Korean and living in Japan and really, you know, losing your identity as a Korean. So thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. You know, that moment when you said that line in that first poem, do you trust me? Like whenever I hear that, no.
Never say yes to that. Yeah. If you have to ask, the answer is no.
Yes, exactly. So, wonderful. Thank you.
We're going to go through all the readings, and then we're going to come back and go to the Q&As for the whole group together. So we're going to have a deep discussion later. Don't anybody disappear. Who's the next reader, Christina?
Our next reader is Jessica DuLong. Jessica, actually, I was having a discussion with her, and the book Body Keeps the Score was on my mind. And when I spoke with Jessica, we're like, well, we really should just do the Salon. And this was like 3 years ago, maybe? Yeah. It was a long time ago. So we really have been sitting on this one for a while. So thank you so much, Jessica, for, you know, doing this with us and really creating this salon. I mean, I think it's such an important one. And sometimes it's easy to just think like, you know, maybe this is going to be too deep or dark or, you know, but it's such an important topic. And I think you guys have so much to share that's going to be so amazing. I can't wait. So let me just introduce Jessica, this amazing person. Jessica DuLong, like I said, she's an American Society of Journalists and Authors Award winner. She is a journalist, historian, ghostwriter, book collaborator, proposal doctor, editor, and writing coach. DuLong's latest book, Saved at the Seawall, Stories from the September 11th Boat Lift, which was actually released as Dust to Deliverance initially, is the definitive history of the largest maritime evacuation in history, larger even than the boat lift at Dunkirk, which is very interesting. Her work has been published by CNN.com, Newsweek, International, Rolling Stone, Psychology Today, New York History, Huffington Post, Newsday, Parenting, Cosmo Girl, and on and on and on. Everyone, please welcome Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation. And it is interesting. I realize it's got to be way more than 3 years because it's pre-pandemic for sure, and that's just like this strange void in time and space. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. And I've been doing a lot of speaking about trauma and specifically trauma in journalism. And just one quick factoid that I think perhaps sort of suggests what's going on here is that if you look at other trauma-facing professions like police officers and firefighters, and how their systems are organized to sort of do a debrief after difficult events, basically that studies are showing that that journalists actually face more trauma because they're there at the beginning and they're at the end and on the anniversaries, and there's actually no infrastructure by and large at most organizations for journalists who have reported on really difficult stories to have a space to sort of talk through that. So that is a big conversation that's happening in journalism. So I'm really glad that you guys are creating space for this.
Seriously interesting. Yeah.
So forgive me, I'm like still recovering from laryngitis. I'm holding on for dear life. And
Your voice is awesome right now. It's like very Marlena Dietrich. It's so great.
If only it wasn't accompanied by pain, it would be fabulous. I just want to jump in and tell the story of Tammy Wiggs, who is a real person. The book the book Saved at the Seawall about the September 11th boat lift is basically it's the remarkable story that still remains largely unknown, which is that nearly 500,000 people were spontaneously rescued by boat from Manhattan's shores on September 11th. And this is one individual story that really struck me. And her name is Tammy Wiggs. So Tammy Wiggs is a little background. She is on her third day, I think, on Wall Street at the New York Stock Exchange, job that she's so excited. She's like fresh out of college. Here she is on the stock exchange and she's really amazed by it. And then what never happened, which is that the stock exchange was closed, which is like that, that's not a thing, although it's becoming more and more of a thing these days, which is a little worrisome. In any event, so she is fleeing with somebody who is a powerhouse at the stock exchange in her company, who she doesn't know before this day. Tammy Wiggs had kept her eyes fixed on the burning buildings while she trailed Karen Lacey walking west from the New York Stock Exchange. The whole sky was littered with things falling, she said. At first, Tammy thought everything fluttering through the sky was only paper. Then she spotted movement and recognized the shapes as people. I saw dead bodies, she told me. I saw bodies jump out of the building. Like a little puppy dog, Tammy continued following Karen. I thought she must know what she was doing because she was so certain about getting home. I didn't realize it meant going closer to the buildings. She was looking directly at the South Tower when it began to fall. At 1 minute before 10 o'clock, the two women exited the winding paths of Battery Park City and stepped onto the plaza at the southwestern corner of North Cove. Their destination, New York Waterway's World Financial Center ferry terminal, now lay just 500 feet away. They faced 2 World Trade Center head on. Tammy says she didn't hear a noise or feel the ground shake. Instead, she noticed the building suddenly growing smaller. Seconds later, the pulverized tower erupted out onto the plaza. Desperate for cover of any kind, Tammy and Karen ducked behind a ticket booth, a structure so small it reminded Tammy of the old-fashioned phone booths she had seen in London during her study abroad. I looked up and I saw the mass of what was coming down. I realized this is not going to do anything to help, so she shot for the water's edge. While Tammy may have been a newbie to her job in finance, she was no novice around water. In fact, she had been a lifelong sailor. If anything, the water's calming to me, she told me, explaining that she had sailed seashells and blue jays as a child, then advanced to 420 sailboats, which she'd raced in the Junior Olympics and in the Women's World Competition in Yokohama, Japan. Growing up a sailor, you live a sailor, she said. She recalled beginning mornings by listening for flags flapping, the sound that would tell her whether she'd spend the day bobbing aimlessly through a windless sky or whipped around so fast she'd flip her boat and wind up swimming. The breeze on this warm September morning was probably blowing at least 10 knots, she recalled. If it hadn't been a windy day, then I wouldn't be here today. When a piece of burning rubble flew at her face, Tammy fled to the river by instinct. It was the opposite of where the whole mess was coming from, she said, and water seemed like the only way out. The debris cloud chased Tammy and Karen to the water's edge. There, they clambered over the 3-foot-high steel railing atop the seawall. A police officer, standing on a nearby stone light pillar, cautioned them, "Ladies, don't jump." Tammy's first impulse was to obey. After all, he was a police officer. Maybe jumping into New York Harbor wasn't such a good idea. But by the time the two women had made it over the railing, its top section curved inward toward the sidewalk, making it a particularly awkward climb. By then, the officer amended his position. "Don't jump yet," he said. Perched on a 7-inch wide ledge suspended 10 feet above the river's surface, clutching the rail behind her back, Tammy pondered his last word, yet. That yet constituted equivocation. It revealed that no one, not even a police officer, had any idea what was coming next. The plume of gray-black smoke had thickened and swelled, mushrooming up as the building crumbled down. The wave of dust cauliflowered up and out, shattering windows and blowing out the immense panes of glass in the dome of the nearby winter garden. The mass barreled down, and Tammy struggled to draw a breath. She gulped what air she could from the choking cloud that engulfed her, then released her grip on the rail at the small of her back. She reached blindly for the hand of the woman beside her, then together they jumped. Time stretched as the two plunged through the dense black air. Split seconds sprawled into an eternity. A fraction of an instant later, Tammy's 5'3" 120-pound frame plunged into the river. Cold seized her chest. Frantic to flee, she kicked back to the surface, stretching her body long, clawing at the water. But after a few strokes, she faltered. The current was ripping. It tugged her downstream. The pall of black smoke, thick with particulates, a clenched hand covering her nose and mouth, left her gasping. The airless sky above the river's surface offered no oxygen, so Tammy dove. "I couldn't breathe at all because of the smoke and particles. I went under the water, hoping to find oxygen," she explained. "It doesn't make any sense, I know, but that was the desperation. There is no oxygen left in this air, so the only other thing is to try underwater." She kicked off her shoes but clung to her purse. "I knew my ID was in there. I wanted my parents to have my ID to identify my body." The drop was farther than Tammy had expected, and the water cold and salty. "I thought we were jumping to swim across," she explained years later, conceding that the very idea seemed embarrassingly absurd to her now. "Running wasn't going to be fast enough, and for some reason I thought swimming was going to be faster." She also thought that being in the water could somehow protect her from the cloud, but when she kicked back to the surface, the air felt thick, heavy, solid. She bobbed up and down 3 or 4 times on her fruitless search for oxygen underwater. Then, just as she thought she didn't have another breath in me, she said, the sky began to clear. Her original impulse to swim the mile to New Jersey had brought her about 10 feet from the Manhattan shoreline. Now she realized she had to swim back. When finally the air lightened from coal black to haze gray, Tammy spotted the painted bow of a boat, its maroon hull about 15 feet away. Thinking the vessel was underway, she panicked. She worried about getting chopped up by the propellers. "We're in the water, we're in the water," she screamed over and over. "Who's in the water?" a voice called back through the fog. Thanks.
Thank you. So 9/11 is one of those moments that every New Yorker will remember to the day they die. Milda actually lived right down there.
Yeah.
I remember how scary that was.
Yeah.
That was truly traumatic for sure. And of course, my anniversary is on 9/11, so
Yeah.
we did not celebrate until this year, actually.
Yeah.
Just because it just seemed I don't know, just brought up a lot. My husband actually is a trader, and he had an open mic down to the stock market, and a lot of different trading firms were connected to the stock market, right? The floor, and there was an actual floor on the trade in the trade towers that was a trading floor, and so everyone in the stock market on the floor heard everything that was going on that floor because they couldn't get off. And as was everyone who was on the floor, they were so traumatized that they changed the hours for many years after 9/11. They were shortened by a lot because everyone was suffering from trauma.
I noticed just now listening to Christina's tell her 9/11 story, how like that your instinct when you're faced with a person or a story, let's just say a story that reveals your trauma, the instinct is to communicate. Like the instinct is to connect on that pain level. And maybe that's why these stories are so powerful and so important to be told, because they release something in you that, oh, there's another body out there somewhere that had the same, or not even the same, but that had a similarly awful experience. And maybe that's why also, just to go back to the motherhood thing, because we're all parents, that birth is so usually not easy for people.
Traumatic.
And people, right? And then like women right after birth, frequently they'll all just start telling you, you just gave birth, and then all of a sudden everybody's telling you their story of their horrible birth, and you're like, oh my God, please shut up. I do not want to hear anybody else's. But it's interesting because there's like this both things. Like there's a desire to tell your story because you feel so much compassion for this person who did not have any idea that this was coming, right? And in a way, that's kind of what this 9/11 story is too. It's like this woman in the water, she had no idea what was coming to her. And all of us during 9/11 had no idea this was coming. And in a way, but even like Richard, your stories of the sexual traumas, like they're so painful because all of us have come closer. I mean, we have like a way in. It's a way into a compassionate frame of mind, which is quite beautiful. And now I'm very excited to hear about Anna and her mother stories. I saw your TED Talk, Anna. You're very, very clever.
Thank you. Oh, that's very kind.
So thank you very much, Jessica. That was beautiful.
Great job, Jessica.
We will come back to talking more about it. For the time being, we have our last final reader, Anna Malaika Tubbs. She's a New York Times best-selling author who has published articles on topics ranging from celebrating motherhood to addressing the forced sterilization of Black women, as well as the importance of feminism, intersectionality, and inclusivity. Her work has been featured in Time Magazine, New York Magazine, CNN, Motherly, The Huffington Post, For Harriet, The Guardian, Darling Magazine, and Blavity. Her first book, titled The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation, was published by Flatiron Books. The book has received critical acclaim and has been featured in Oprah Daily, People Magazine, USA Today, The Skin, Fortune Magazine, MSNBC, CBS, C-SPAN, NPR, Forbes, you get it.
Everywhere.
So everyone, please welcome Anna Malaika.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm honored to be here and so excited that I was invited. And Jessica, thank you for including me. And I see my book in your background, and I'm so honored by that. Thank you.
We love
There
that.
it is. She's going to show it because I'm reading the electronic version. So this is from my first chapter. There it is.
It's
for those who
so
haven't bought
good.
it.
It is so good. It is
Yay!
so good. Look at this. Look at all these
Thank
post-it
you.
notes.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, here we go. I'll do my reading. I have my timer set so I don't go over. Starting my 4 minutes.
That's
now.
it. You're coming back.
Following the rules. Writing about Black motherhood while becoming one gave me a much deeper perspective than I had before. As my own life and body transformed, it became even more important to me to tell Alberta's, Bertus's, and Louise's stories before they became mothers. Their lives did not begin with motherhood. On the contrary, long before their sons were even thoughts in their minds, each woman had her own passions, dreams, and identity. Each woman was already living an incredible life that her children would one day follow. Their identities as young Black girls in Georgia, Grenada, and Maryland influenced the ways in which they would approach motherhood. Their exposure to racist and sexist violence from the moments that they were born would inform the lessons they taught their children. Their intellect and creativity led to fostering such qualities in their homes. The relationships they witnessed in their parents and grandparents would inspire their own approaches to marriage and child rearing. Highlighting their roles as mothers does not erase their identities as independent women. Instead, these identities informed their ability to raise independent children who would go on to inspire the world for years to come. These women's lives create a rich portrait of the nuances of Black motherhood. Yes, all three were mothers of sons who became internationally known, and their stories share many similarities, but by no means can their identities be reduced into one. Each woman carried different values, faiths, talents, and traumas. I hope their rich differences will open our eyes to the many influences and manifestations of Black motherhood in the United States and beyond. The narratives of these three women have fueled and empowered me, but this work has been extremely difficult at times. Black motherhood in the United States is inextricable from a history of violence against Black people. American gynecology was built by torturing Black women and experimenting on their bodies to test procedures. J. Marion Sims, known as the father of American gynecology, developed his techniques by slicing open the vaginal tissues of enslaved women as they were held down by force. He refused to provide them with anesthesia. Francois Marie Prevost, who is credited with introducing C-sections in the United States, perfected his procedure by cutting into the abdomens of laboring women who were slaves. These women were treated like animals, and their pain was ignored. There is a paradoxical relationship between the dehumanization we Black women and our children face and our ability to resist it. Beyond the normal worries all mothers encounter as they progress through pregnancy and get closer to their labors, we Black mothers are aware that we are risking our lives. Black women in the United States are more likely to die while pregnant and while giving birth than other mothers. Beyond the normal fear that all mothers feel when the gut-wrenching thought of losing their child creeps its way into their minds, we Black mothers experience a heightened level of worry. We are aware of how differently our children are seen and treated in society, and our fears are confirmed by articles and news stories reporting the violence that Black children experience constantly, whether at parties, in school, or at their local parks. This fear continues as our children become adults who are in danger even as they sleep in their beds, sit in their own apartments, when they call for help, or when they go on a run. Louise, Bertus, and Alberta were well aware of the dangers they and their children would be met with as Black people in the United States. I'll just finish this paragraph. And they all strove to equip their children not only to face the world, but to change it, with the knowledge that they themselves were seen as less than and their children would be too. The three mothers collected tools to thrive with the hopes of teaching their children how to do the same. Thank you.
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind when you were reading was Serena Williams. When she came out and said, like, she nearly died, it was like, what? Serena Williams? Like, if that can happen to Serena Williams, that can happen to just anyone, right? But
Yeah.
so that just blew my mind. I have a question.
Yes.
How much research did you do on these women, and what were some of the similarities and differences between these women and how they raised their children, and what are some of the things that we can learn from them to teach our own children?
Oh, there's so much. I will try to keep that short because I know we're getting into a rich discussion after this, so I don't want to monopolize the time. But yes, I did mostly all the research for this book. So if you Googled search their names before my book came out, there was very little out there. No one had really stopped to ask this question before, which was shocking to me that I'm the first person to write these stories or write this book. So most of it is my original research. This is also based off my doctoral dissertation. So that had to be original research for me to get my PhD. So I was calling local historians. I was traveling all around the country. I was interviewing family members. I was sifting through boxes and boxes of letters and data, finding land deeds, birth certificates, death certificates. So really, I'm so grateful when people talk about the writing in the book being beautiful. And then I often think sometimes people forget that this is also my research. So I appreciate you asking that question. And then in terms of the similarities and the differences, there are so many differences. I really wanted to emphasize the differences because so often Black women are represented as if we're a monolith, and people try to reduce us into one category, and that in and of itself is incredibly dehumanizing. So I didn't want to repeat that. But there are also many ways in which their stories intersect, and sometimes very sadly so. They all had very different backgrounds. They were part of different social spheres. They had different levels of access to resources, and still they faced many of the same problems because they were Black women. So that kind of representation that I was talking about a little earlier plays out in their lives. They face violence as a result. They are discriminated against as a result. And the thing that I think we can all walk away from, I mean, there's a lot of lessons in the book, but one of the primary ones is what it means to raise children in a country that might see them as less than who they are. These kind of tenets, especially for parents raising children of color and very specifically Black children. The first tenet being that we have to tell them about how ugly the world can be. We have no choice in the matter. We have to explain to them there are some people out there that are going to be mean, that might be dangerous for you. But the second part of that is that we can't allow our children to be defined by that or feel limited by that. And instead, we need them to feel like they can change the world as we currently know it, that people have done that before them and that they must really, but that they're not alone in that really is the third part, that they're part of a legacy. This book is entirely about generational knowledge. Of course, it addresses generational trauma as well. There's also about these generational moments of resistance and fighting and believing that we must change the world. And the fourth part, though, is knowing you're a part of this team. It doesn't always fall on you. You don't have to constantly be fighting. A big part of that fight is our relaxation, our joy, our love for each other. So the book is filled with all of these moments where, for example, Malcolm X used to love growing peas. So he would sit in his garden and look up at the sky and grow peas. Like, this is also a part of us understanding what these three men also sacrificed for our nation. They were human beings. And so you really walk through the book getting to know the moms, getting to know the sons, from this perspective of humanity. And therefore the trauma then feels so much more real. We're no longer numb to that. It's no longer just something we're saying happened in history. Two of these women, their sons were assassinated. And we need to talk about the real pain of that, not only for the entire world, not only for the Black community, for this family, for their mothers, for their siblings, for their children. So that's really, the book is really trying to find the balance of celebrating their extraordinary moments as well as their ordinary moments in life.
I love the idea of the humanization of it, of the humanization of history into like domestic scenes. Like, it's so amazing to think of like these fabulous people like being in their houses and having to wash dishes or whatever they had to
Yeah.
do, you know, like it's great. One of the things I really liked from your TED Talk was that when you opened with the some, you know, that they talk about the birth scene and how like, oh, there was this birth scene, and Anna, you said like, you know, it wasn't just the child that was there. Like there was somebody else in that room when that child was born in that space. And it was just very funny that when famous people arrive on the scene, they just arrive on the scene. They get born in a wherever they get born, you know, but you forget that like of somebody, you know.
Yeah. Should I tell people what I said for those who haven't watched it?
Go ahead. Yeah, say it. Say it. I can't say it. You say it. Do it.
Every year around January 15th, we celebrate the birth of MLK Jr. with MLK Day. It's around his birthday. And none of us have really stopped to consider who else was in the room on the day that he was born. As if somehow MLK Jr., on top of everything else that he did, he also birthed himself. Which is clearly not true. He did not pop out of nowhere. There was a woman there. Her name was Alberta Williams King.
You mean he just didn't do a little dance?
Yeah, he was like, hello, I have ideas about non-violence. I'm here.
Well,
yeah.
Let's bring everybody all. Oh, sorry. Did you want to do?
Let's all come on. Yes.
Oh, come on. We want to talk.
So one of the things that I'm really interested about is, so, you know, trauma in the art, you know, artists always deal with trauma in a way that is so humanizing, right? Like that's part of a lot of why we write. I mean, I know for me, when one of the reasons why I am a writer is because I used to get my butt kicked for being Chinese every single day. And it was so traumatic that I started to write about that and speak about that through my work. And I think that that's probably true with a lot of writers, because it's those moments that you want justice and you want humanity. You want people to see, right? Like, look, just as human, like same emotions, right? And I think that that's what makes this so beautiful, like that you guys are exploring these things and really bringing out their experiences. Jessica, you chose this this woman, Tammy Wiggs, and can you talk about why you chose this particular story over others?
Well, I think the most, I'll tell you why I chose it for this venue, because it's not one that because there are sort of so many complicated details, it's not one that I often go to, but Tammy's story affected me in such a deep way because we were both newbies at our jobs at the same time. So I was in service at Ground Zero aboard retired fireboat John J. Harvey. So I had just had 6 months on the job as an engineer and was down there and was lost in a new city, you know, in a new job. Sorry for the car alarms. Apparently that's still a thing. I thought we were done with those. And not only that, but the way that so it's always a long process, the research, right, that goes into finding these individuals. There are so many steps to that. And when I found her and she was willing to share her story, she actually shared with me elements of her story that she had not told anybody, because one of the things that people do often when they're traumatized is they try to shield the people they love. And so it was her first time telling this story, which of course, you know, made me feel a huge responsibility to do right by all that pain. You know, I'm walking with somebody through the most horrific day, and her story is worse. She actually watches, as she finds out later, that she watched the building come down that contained her college roommate. And there are other situations that happened. But when she and I were doing the interview, this was so long before Zoom, we were doing it over Skype, but like really bad connection, and it kept getting interrupted. She had a newborn at home. I had a baby at home. And while she was telling me the story and we keep having these tech issues, we're both aware that the babies are going to wake up soon. And I had to get her to New Jersey. Like our story couldn't stop with her in the water in a horrific place. Like I had to get her to the other side of the water. I just felt that deep responsibility and just, listening to the noises of your baby while talking through these stories, even when they're asleep. That's the thing that really affected me. And writing this book while I was pregnant and then, had my first child I would not recommend it to anybody because it really messed with my mind in a lot of really big ways.
I want to talk about that on both sides. I want to talk about what you just said about how hard it is to deal with your own personal trauma, writing something difficult while you have a child in the house that you have to be the strong one for. Yeah. Can we talk about that a minute? And then I have another question as well. So let's talk about that first, because all three of you had to write these really hard things. How did you manage the emotional, let's call it self-care? I hate that word, but how did you manage that emotional strength to be able to go back and forth between writing something that is absolutely shaking you to your core and then being the parent?
Why don't we start with
Who
Richard?
wants to start?
Yeah, we can start with Richard. Richard hasn't spoken in a while. Go ahead.
Sure. Am I hearing feedback?
Yes, but I don't know
I
who
am
it is.
too.
Okay. So I'll just I'll just talk through it. I just wasn't sure if it was just me.
I don't know whose it is, so sorry, not techie.
I mean, I had I was the guy who violated me. I was about 12 years old the first time, and most men, so I'm 60, most men my age, of my generation, who are sexually abused as children, don't disclose that fact often for decades. I mean, men go into their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, their 70s. And this is Milda. I promise I am answering your question, but it's sort of a roundabout way.
I trust you.
When I was about 19 years old, I was reading a book by Adrienne Rich called On Lies, Secrets, and Silence. It's a book of her essays. And I'm not going to bother now but I was reading in one particular essay, she was writing about the sexual objectification of women and what we would now call rape culture. They didn't call it rape culture back then, but we would now call it rape culture. And I heard, I heard it was a voice in my head that said, what about me? What about what happened to me? Mm. In that confrontation with myself, I had to make a choice. Was I going to tell the truth to myself, or was I not going to tell the truth to myself? And I told the truth. I decided I was going to tell the truth. And that was the beginning of my discovery, for want of a better word, of feminism. And the gift that feminism gave me, and so I'm talking about the 1980s, right? So this is, this is quote unquote second wave radical feminism, right? By the way people label it now. The gift that feminism gave me was the absolutely uncompromising certainty that the only person who's responsible for an act of sexual violence is the person who commits it. Right. Which in the 1980s was a fairly revolutionary thing to say and to hold on to and commit to. But that made it possible for me to start to talk about what happened to me to people a whole lot earlier than a lot of men my age. Mm-hmm. Right. I had whatever shame, I had whatever anxiety. Not that I didn't have those things, but one thing I didn't have was any doubt that I was not at fault. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So now I'll come to the question of having a kid in the house while I'm doing this. One of the things that became for me a very deeply personal commitment to a feminist vision Not simply because of women's equality, women's right, women's empowerment. I mean, I don't mean to say that dismissively, but not simply because of that, but because clearly, I mean, I would not be here now being able to talk about this the way I am talking about it as a man had it not been for feminism. I was co-opting the language. I was co-opting, I mean, because if you go back and read these women, what they wrote, I mean, they were very clearly not writing for me. They were writing about me as me, writ large, as the oppressor. So I was co-opting it, but I wouldn't be able to talk about it like this. So when we have a son, and I mean, he's now 24. For me, a lot of the question was, how am I going to raise my son given my experience? How am I going to talk to him about what it means to be a man, about his own body, about all of those questions, given my experience? And I mean, the last poem in Words for What Those Men Have Done is called For My Son, a Kind of Prayer. And it was much too long to read, I mean, here, but it's basically responding to that question in some ways.
Right.
And so it was hard, but I was able from this kind of context to draw kind of strength from it.
Thank you.
You know what I love about your work is that, people, when we talk about sexual trauma, people automatically think about women and sexual trauma. Like they, rarely think about men and the men who, experience trauma this way. And that was so, like, it wasn't great. I mean, I'm not saying no. But I really appreciated that you read that poem and really brought it out there. We had, a sexuality salon last month, and darn, we should have had you then. No, it's just such an important topic, and I'm so glad.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And what about you others, you Jessica, you Anna? How did you go back and forth emotionally from writing something so difficult to being the strong? Yeah, sure, I'll give you a 5th peanut butter sandwich, no problem. Like how did that work in your how did you do that physically? Did you what were your tricks and tips?
Yeah. Well, when I was writing Three Mothers, I was pregnant with my first. So I didn't have yet someone asking for peanut butter sandwiches, except, well, maybe I craved peanut butter sandwiches. But I was definitely, it was difficult. I was talking about the loss of children. I was talking about the violence that's been committed against Black women, especially pregnant Black women. And then I'm at the same time feeling my child kick, and it was just such an emotional journey for me in so many ways. To this day, my parenting is almost inextricable from the work I did for this book and what I learned from these women. And I really felt that Alberta and Bertus and Louise, the 3 mothers that I write about, were really kind of like welcoming me into motherhood, because in some ways it was awful that I related to a lot of the fears that they felt through the 1900s, early 1900s. But in other ways, I felt like they were teaching me their strategies for resistance. They were teaching me their ways to still hold on to those human moments, to remember that fear shouldn't be the driving feeling in my pregnancy, that I actually should focus on my joy and also focus on advocating for myself. It felt like they were saying, be informed, yes, know the dangers of this, yes, but look at all of us who have done this before you, and look at ways in which we've changed this world as a result, because we were not willing to accept the circumstance as it was, because we saw ourselves as human beings, and we certainly saw our children as the most precious human beings in the world. So it was a welcoming embrace, and a very warm one, and one that I'm grateful for. And it inspired me, there's some very tangible moments. For instance, I said, I'm definitely going to have doulas with me if I go and deliver at the hospital, I'll have doulas with me. And with my daughter, I said, I'm going to do a birth at home with a midwife of color, who's going to see me as a human being. Like you said earlier, Christina, if even Serena Williams was being faced with these biases, what was going to happen, for someone like a young woman going into the hospital and maybe not being taken seriously, or people not listening to me when I'm saying what I want and what I need. So that was one thing was, okay, I can't just say, sit in this fear. I have to do something with it, and it has to be beyond me. And so I then felt even more driven to write this book, that these stories needed to be out there, because they were telling me Black women have always stood tall in the face of this. We have always resisted. We have always reclaimed our humanity. And I now need to do this for other mothers who are experiencing this fear. And so I kind of call myself almost like a pretend doula now with all the research I've done on motherhood in the US. And I'm so aware of the strategies to make mothers feel so fearful. And I'm aware that it's all part of American patriarchy for women to feel like they're out of control in this situation. So it's even not only in Black motherhood, but universally this experience in the United States of so many mothers feeling like our voices are being lost and we're not being heard, and we're being taken for granted. So it's also this larger message that just kept getting amplified the more and more I uncovered about 3 particular women.
When I was a young mom, somebody told me to practice trusting my child, which I just thought was such a great piece of advice. Like, practice trusting them. You're always going to be afraid for them all the time, and the world is going to make you even more scared. So you have to just practice trusting them, and it's very hard.
Yeah,
it's very, very hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because my son is in 6th grade and he's taking the public bus home now, right? We live in the city, so it's public transport and whatever. And before, maybe 10 years ago, if my son had been on the bus, my older son, I never even thought about, was like, whatever, just walk home from the bus or whatever. My younger son, because of all the anti-Asian sentiment, like, I actually get really nervous and I go pick him up at the bus stop and we walk home together. And he was like, Mom, can you please stop? Like, I have friends on my bus, and it's like practicing trust, right? Like, at a certain point, you have to kind of give a little space and whatever, but it's so terrifying. It's just so terrifying.
Jessica, you're not off the hook. How did you balance your emotional inner self with having a kid?
Oh man, first I have to, that trust, the hard part about that trust your child is like, it's not the kid I'm worried about, you know what I mean?
It's everything that's going to happen.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, telling the real truth, which is that so I'm a postpartum doula by training, and have my certification, and only in really learning about postpartum anxiety and compulsive disorder and depression and all that stuff, really the spectrum, because I had a concept of depression, right? But I didn't have a concept for all the other things. And I can now look back and say, oh yeah, I might have should have gotten a little extra help with that, because I was so fearful. I was so fearful, and I was, had some compulsions that were just made sense, right? Because I was worried about my kid and I didn't want them to get germs and, that kind of thing. But then looking back, I'm like, yeah. So probably the answer to the question is badly, right? But what I did do, so when it was time for my child to do some part-time babysitting, like childcare with this lovely woman, I literally wrote up a card that said, in case of these various horrific things that could happen, this is where I want you to be. So it was like, okay, in case of like chemical warfare, I need you to go down to the subway. Right. I need you to, like, in case of, all the different scenarios, if being outside and in the fresh air is the dangerous thing, then I want you to go into the library. I mean, the first thing is bring him home. But like, if you can't do that, these are the things. And I still have this card, and I still, like, Yeah, it was not healthy. And honestly, a big piece of that came from one of the stories that I chronicle in this book, is the story of a nanny and a 4-year-old who literally get caught in the collapse, leave the townhouse after the mother has said, don't go anywhere, but it's getting so bad that they leave, end up getting caught in the collapse of the towers, end up boarding a tiny police boat and end up in New Jersey. The nanny is from Zambia. She's never been to New Jersey. I mean, she lived in New York for a while, but she'd never been to New Jersey. And then they were not connected, and then they could not find each other, the mother and the child. And the nanny, who had been with this child since she was 4 weeks old, I think, could not remember the phone number of the mother because of trauma.
Of course. Oh,
right.
Oh my God.
And so she even when she could get a phone, and cell phones weren't working then very well, as you might remember, and we were still dealing with flip phones back then, and the service was terrible, and so it was hours and hours and hours while they were separated, the mother and the daughter. And I couldn't, I still can't. And so I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Well, let me ask my follow-up question. Maybe it'll be better. So you mentioned to protect the reader. When you were talking, you were saying that you were careful to protect the reader. And I'm really interested in each of your cases, as you were writing the difficult parts of your books and your poetry, how much thought do you give to the person who is going to be reading this cold? Are you protecting them at all? Do you think, trigger warnings? How would you take that, protect the reader and put it into your thing? I'm curious. Sorry.
So we should start.
Anna, how about you mentioned? Oh, you want to start?
I can start. Yeah, sure. How much do we think about the reader? I really wanted every reader to kind of walk beside the 3 women we were getting to know in this book, like be beside them when they're little girls, be beside them when they're having children, be beside them as adults and mothers who lose their children. And as much as possible, really, like, not step in their shoes, but just be their companion. And so in those moments where traumatic events happen, I wanted it to feel like it, even to a certain extent, what it would have felt like to them, So with Alberta, when her father passes away, it's like a normal day. And then her daughter is in another room, and she comes back and says, hey, Dad, or Grandpa's taking a nap. And then this is the moment we realize he's had a heart attack. He's died. And this is just how it would feel for, obviously we can't fully explain or fully understand how that's going to feel for Alberta, but similar to the racial violence that they experienced. If Alberta's a little girl in Atlanta, this is MLK Jr.'s mother, and then there's a race riot that goes through their town and a white mob comes through and is just burning things, I want the reader to feel that same sense of, oh my God, why is this happening to us? So that's how I write about it, and really, truly just from that perspective of how close can we get to understanding these human moments. And for one example with Louise Little, who's Malcolm X's mother, at one point when Malcolm X was a child, their house was set on fire by the KKK, and I talk about it as it happened. They're sleeping, everything's peaceful, and then suddenly you're hearing fire. Oh, thank you, Star, for that compliment. I appreciate it. You hear the fire and things are moving around, and the children, it's hectic. Louise is just trying to grab all her children. She has 7 children. Later, she has 8, but she's picking them up and trying to get them out of the house. And so that's kind of the experience of the book.
Jessica?
It's interesting because I was actually talking about protecting the source, so the person who was telling me her story. But this is such a great question, because I think a lot about. I certainly think a lot about the reader's experience. In fact, everything that I do, that's where I start. You know, it's that's the framework, is like, what does the reader need and when do they need it? You know, what do they need next in the story? And it's all driven by the reader, the way that I do it. And so I think what that means, you know, maybe the best thing is an example. So I just gave a talk on trauma and journalism in Norway at a journalism conference, and someone came up to me afterwards, and he was struggling. He's writing a memoir. He had a really epic journey from through sobriety, from being homeless to being a police officer to all of this stuff, and he's reckoning with his childhood in the memoir. And he asked me, so his mother is dead, and he asked me, he's like, how much truth do I have to tell about my mother? You know, and he was really struggling with that because he didn't want to dishonor her. But he also, you know, it's crucial. And so he wasn't trying to condemn her or damn her, and he recognized that she had done the best that she could do. And so what we talked through it a little bit, and what I came up with, which I think makes sense, is tell just enough. Tell what needs to be there for the story, for the reader to follow. You know, what is your mission for the work, and then let that decide what you tell. You don't have to, like, all the skeletons don't need to come out of the closet, and you know, all of the most horrific things don't need to be put, you know, presented front and center. And actually, I watch a lot of trauma neuroscience webinars for providers, because I deal with a lot of traumatic material in my book collaboration work in addition. Plus, I'm just crazy obsessed, interested in it and how the neuroscience works. But one of these webinars, Bessel, the author, and I never know how to say his name, Bessel
Vonderkamp.
Yes. So the body keeps the score. So he was talking about how, for therapists, he was saying, don't let your prurient interest guide the questions. The person who's in therapy doesn't need to talk through the incidents of the trauma. That's not what they need. That's not helpful. That's for you. And so I think, honestly, I think there's so much for us to learn about being writers with readers, because in a way, what is not said is so powerful. And what is just between the lines. And there are some great examples that I use with my clients of, like, works, you know, where, like, look at the incredible horror and fear and suspense and tension that this author created with white space, like with not saying it. And so that's what I think about.
Richard, you're a poet, and it's very obvious you're a good poet. So,
Thank you.
Because I think that what Jessica just said really is relatable to your poetry. Like, there was a lot not said. We were very grateful because it is, yes, speak.
So I don't think about it in terms of protecting the reader. Right. I don't think about it in terms of that, because I do. And I mean, I think partially this is maybe a difference between writing poetry and writing nonfiction. Right. I mean, the contract with the reader is different in a poem than it is in a book of nonfiction or an essay. Part of the contract is you as the writer are going to make sense of this for the reader in some way, shape, or form. Right. You're going to, you know, you're explaining, you're analyzing. I mean, it's your sense. I mean, right? You don't give up your own perspective in it, but you're trying to make a perspective clear for the reader. Whereas in a poem, it's more about, at least this is the way I think of it, it's more about exploring it's more about an explore. You arrive at something, right? You're exploring an experience. You arrive at something that is not broadly speaking, like discursive in the way that nonfiction prose is, if that distinction kind of makes sense. So I don't think about it so much in terms of protecting the reader, as much as I think about, I mean, I think what Jessica said is a good way to put, you know, what is necessary? What is necessary? I wrote in my 30s an awful lot of, like, gratuitous trauma porn. trying to figure out how to, and I mean that descriptively, not critically, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to write about this experience in a way, in a way that would make it, and I mean, I'll say what I mean by this, in a way that would make it beautiful. And I don't mean by beauty, I don't mean like surface loveliness.
Understand.
Right. I mean like, you know, beauty in the way that connects us with what is both dark and what is light, right? I mean, real beauty is not just about surface loveliness. And figuring out, like, I mean, in the poem that I read, you know, the metaphor that I used, you know, pouring into whatever the line is, right? That is a way of saying it that captures something that goes beyond my raw experience.
Yeah.
Right. It goes beyond my raw experience, and I think it offers readers an entree that is not simply what's the word? Gratuitous is not. That is not simply
graphic.
This is right. Thank you. That is not right. That's not just a graphic represent. You know, it's not just a graphic representation. But one of the other reasons I don't think about protecting the reader, and then I'll stop. I don't think I've ever given a reading, an in-person reading, where I've read this material, where there hasn't been a man who has come up to me and said thank you. Right. I mean, one time a guy actually followed me into the bathroom.
Oh my God.
Because he was so, it was so important to him that no one else should hear him say what he wanted to say to me. And I think worrying about that's a lot more important to me than protecting someone's sensibilities. Right. I have no problem saying, look, this is going to deal with difficult material. You should know ahead of time.
Right.
I have no problem, but I don't. For just that reason, I don't think about protecting.
All right. I've got 2 questions from the audience, and we're very close to. Well, we're way over time, but this is still great, so we're just talking. But Jessica, can you just list off some of the books that you recommend to your clients?
Yes. You know what? I'm going to look at my bookshelf while you ask the next question.
Okay, that sounds good. This is a really cool question. It's about writing. Laura Henneman wants to know, for all of these authors, the traumas in question are real. For fiction writers who are developing characters with traumatic backstories or experiences, what do fiction writers need to know to make a trauma seem realistic? Please to be explaining, my writer friends.
But is it
like what?
Is it in the question? Is it the trauma, or is it sort of the backstory?
To make it realistic, the trauma. I imagine the experience, the how does it feel? How does it realistic? What?
Oh, that's hard.
That is really hard. What makes it?
I think one of the things that is really important is research. And
I was going to say that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people make a lot of assumptions about things, and if you don't do research, you don't realize, like, Anna said something before that was so smart about, was it Malcolm X who grew peas? Like, like it's those things that you would never think about that totally humanize a person. And it's the things that you don't think about that make them real.
But I think that and then the connection between the trauma and how the behavior is, you can get that, you can source that from actual blogs, there are people, you can find humans that have had experiences, and the internet is full of them that are more than social media. You can more than you want to find out how people are processing their respective
oftentimes
traumas.
If you understand that character enough, if you understand where that character's been and what kind of trauma and how the trauma plays out, like that's when the character takes on, starts to decide the story.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Let's
So-
let Jessica give us her book recommendations real quick.
Yeah.
I have an
Okay,
answer to that one too later after the
go.
recommendation.
Yeah.
So it's just what I can pull up really quickly right now,
Sure.
but Hunger, this is a great
yeah.
example
We have
of
heard many good
the
things about it.
unsaid, what is unsaid. Sort of at the other end of the spectrum, The Apology, which is an epistolary
Gensler.
story, yes, by who's now going by V, I believe. Goodbye, Sweet Girl. And
We're going to put all of these books, by the way. We're going to put, no, you keep talking. Keep telling us what this book is about, because we're going to put them all on our bookshop so that you guys can have a link, and we'll send that out. Go ahead.
I can't, the mirror is making it very hard to hold this up, not crooked,
Heavy,
but anyway.
Who wrote Heavy?
Casey Lehman, who is just, oh my goodness, I watched him read, and it just took my breath away. I mean, he talks about sexual assault and talks about, I mean, just these absolutely harrowing scenarios with the beauty that you were talking about, Richard, like that beauty of the dark and the light together. I mean, it's just staggering. And I know there's more. Well, certainly, I actually haven't read this. I just found this on the street in Brooklyn. I'm very excited, but I haven't read it yet. But you know, collecting these, knowing that there's.
And Anna, what were you going to say? I've got to wrap up really soon. So
yeah, no, I was just going to talk about the research too. I've been working on a novel actually for longer than The Three Mothers. So whenever it comes out,
we're excited to hear about it. Awesome.
Yeah, but I talk about sexual violence in it, and I talk about disinformation in it. And I just think that there's a little bit of a misconception about the fact that people think nonfiction requires so much research and that like novels don't. But the reality is that novels are so much research because you're trying, exactly, and poems, exactly that. I mean, it's even the way that the industry is set up. With a nonfiction, you sell the proposal, the idea, and then you get the advance in order to do the research to, you know, come up with the book. Versus a novel, you're supposed to have it entirely written, like almost like near final draft before you sell it, and then you can make money off of it, which is almost insinuating that you don't have to do research to write it, which is obviously not true. So definitely research, and just really, again, walking through stories like a human being would, and really considering that rather than like trying to decide what you're actually trying to accomplish with it. Is it just to have a shock and awe moment, or is it because it's going to be formative to this human being's story and why they make certain decisions? So just taking it just as we are writers, take it as seriously in that research as we do for these other categories.
And take very good care of yourself when you're writing these difficult things, because it will affect you if you're doing it right.
Yeah.
So take your time.
Can I add one book to the list of recommendations?
Oh yeah.
Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl.
Oh yes.
It is a fascinating book. Janine Vanasco actually interviewed the man who raped her.
Oh wow.
And they had been best friends.
Oh my God.
And it is a fascinating book. She has transcripts of the interviews in the book. It is just such an atypical
Well, we
memoir.
will put all of these books onto our bookshelf with your books, and you guys can all go to our bookshop and buy all these books, because then we get some money for Parentis, and we are a nonprofit. They get some money because they wrote the books, and
they deserve it.
And independent bookstores get some money, because if you go through Bookshop, they shop through all the independent bookstores near you. So plug for bookshop.org. They're very cool.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to tell you is that Parentis, that is the nonprofit that has sponsored this amazing hour and 22 minutes that you guys have been paying attention to us. We're having a fundraiser. Please donate to it. Go on givebutter.com/writeforever. It's somewhere in your comments link, and give us money. As much or as you can, please. We love your money. We need it because we want to pay these authors and other authors like them. And we want you to keep coming back every single month and watch our new salon. The next one is on Tuesday, December 13th. It is our season closer. It features novelist Clavis Natera, who wrote Neruda in the Park. And then the Guggenheim Fellow and novelist Lan Samantha Chang, who wrote The Family Chow. And there is a return from the incredible Jacqueline Michard, who has written 22 best-selling novels and has how many children? 9?
7.
Wow.
7, 9, 11, some very large number. It's insane. I mean, kudos her. And she's really fun. She told us the most awesome story when she was on about how when Oprah called her, she just didn't pick up. She didn't believe her. Like, Oprah had to call her twice. She was the first Oprah book club pick. And she
didn't bother.
Oprah was like, she was like, yeah, whatever. You're just making fun of me. She's really funny. You should come next month in Tuesday, October 13th. And also, if you really, really love us, after you give us money on givebutter.com/writeforever, it would be really cool if you would be a fundraiser for us and click the little blue plus button to be added to our team, to become a team member, and just it says fundraise for us. If you click that button, and fundraise for us is a competition. And whoever is the team member that collects the most money from their friends, family, relatives, and rich people that they drag down on the street and ask to give us money, whoever collects the most money gets to be backstage with us at a salon. It is so much fun to be backstage with us. You get to actually talk to us and hang out with us in the green room. So get out there and get people to give us money. Our mission, as you should know by now, is to keep writers on creative track after they have children. All 3 of these authors, and Christina and I, all have children, and we're all writers. And we think that all writers with kids should finish their books, finish their poems, finish their nonfiction projects, write their memoirs. We give you all the resources that we can possibly come up with, including an annual fellowship that gives you money. We give you these salons, which give you inspiration and also a place to read once you've actually made it. And we also give you accountability groups, which are weekly. Once a week, you meet, you set goals, you create your own little Zoom community that are fun like us, that we just hang out, we talk, we care that you finish your work. So please join us as a title member, join an accountability group, and or join our fundraiser and at givebutter.com/writeforever. And we will see you all next week. Thank you so much to our phenomenal authors. Yay! And Clydette, thanks for coming.
Thank you, authors. Thank you, Clydette.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.